I mean, it's interesting you say that because for the last 2.5 years, they've had literally a zero-out campaign. That's what they call it, of Falun Gong, where they're going around the country. This is one of the trends we talk about in the report where, again, it's sort of like if you're going to persecute people for like going on 23 years, they have to breathe new life into it. So every 4 years, you see a new campaign and, new monetary incentives, all this kind of stuff. So back in 2020, there was the Zero Out campaign against Falun Gong. And the idea was to bring the number of Falun Gong practitioners in your area to zero.
Wait, was this before or after zero COVID happened?
Before.
Okay.
So this started in like April of 2020.
Oh.
No.
Oh.
Yeah. So,
okay.
So there was COVID.
Yes.
Actually, no, I'm sorry. It started the year before. So this was going on before COVID just hit the scene. Yeah.
Okay, so 2019.
But you see a very similar mentality. And, the idea was to try and use coercion and some of the more tech things, so they have, the card that everybody carries in China that has a chip on it that, has all, your social credits, all that kind of stuff.
You mean like on your phone, like it's got like your app?
Yeah,
set.
so now they have a thing where if you're one of the things you're flagged as a Falun Gong practitioner, if you just get within 20 feet of a police officer that's got one of these devices, it goes off. So they can actually tell who the Falun Gong are. They just walk into a square and tell who the Falun Gong are. That's one of the things they're using in this Zero Out campaign. But you made the analogy, it's having less effective than the zero COVID policy.
Wait, so if you practice Falun Gong in China, your phone has like because you're not going to put that on your own phone, right?
No, they do it.
So someone has identified you as Falun Gong.
Like, would you have had to have been detained before or something?
Yeah, they knew
Okay.
you, or they, maybe they weren't quite detained. Maybe you harassed, right? Maybe they know there's this community of 5 Falun Gong people in this neighborhood, and they've ransacked your home, they've confiscated stuff. Maybe you haven't been detained. A lot of them have been detained.
Or maybe you're just suspected of being
somehow
Falun Gong,
you've been identified.
So then, like everywhere you go, they can essentially, and because like one of the things that they did with that they've used the zero COVID stuff for is earlier this summer, there were a bunch of protests because some of the local banks were not allowing people to make withdrawals. They're like freezing their accounts. And so people went to the protests. And then afterwards, it turned out that like local authorities had turned some of the people's COVID apps turned red, or their travel app or whatever. So they couldn't actually take public transit to go to another protest. And it's like your phone turns red saying like you can't travel because you have COVID, but actually it's because
they want to control your movement. Yeah.
And so they can do that now to Falun Gong because everyone has cell phones.
I think that like that case also was in a few cases, people had talked on WeChat or something like that about joining a protest and their code changed color. Their health code changed color. So yeah, that actually reminds me, like there was something happening similar to the Uyghurs where they were being made to install certain apps on their phones. And I mean, obviously, geographically, it's easier to keep track of the Uyghurs because most of them are going to be in Xinjiang. But like that sounds very. I had no idea that they were doing that with Falun Gong too.
So if you have COVID, your app turns red. If you're Falun Gong, it turns yellow.
I don't know what the color is, but it's not good.
Okay. So, it's interesting because like the Uyghurs, right, they're all in one place. Although now they've made the mistake, the party has made the mistake of shipping them out to do forced labor in all different parts of China.
Yeah, well, I think
now it's harder to keep track.
Well, not when they ship them out because they're in separate facilities with security guards and things like that.
It's like how to get around U.S. sanctions on Xinjiang is you just do the Xinjiang forced labor, that same thing, but you bring the people in the factories to a different province, and then it's like A-okay.
Well, I actually think that the Xinjiang slave labor bill has a provision that accounts for that. Like, it doesn't have to be physically in Xinjiang as long as it's slave labor with Uyghurs. But I think they were doing that before any of that legislation came in because they were trying to hide how many people were being detained. They were trying to kind of like disappear the population so that you wouldn't be able to tell how many people were in detention.
And that's something that's been going on for years, a tactic like that. I mean, a lot of the Falun Gong and labor camps over the years will tell the stories of just the 2 locations, right? A lot of these camps have 2 locations. It's stuff where the actual slave labor happens and the stuff is made, then it's put on a truck, it's shipped over to the company warehouse where they say they make it, but they don't, and that's the official address and everything like that. So that kind of stuff has been going on for many, many years.
What was that documentary that we watched, like Letter to Masanja, where there was like a guy, Letter from Masanja, where he was like making like Halloween kits or something.
Yeah,
and then
Halloween decorations.
Because he was detained for practicing Falun Gong, and then like some American woman found like a Halloween decoration with like a "Help me, I'm in a labor camp" note, and then so
she was in Oregon, and I think the filmmaker actually got those two together. He had gotten out of China. And the woman in Oregon who found those got those two together for an interview.
Yeah. Well, speaking of America, I want to kind of bring this back to some of the stuff that the Communist Party is doing, the transnational repression, because we started talking about that, and I actually wanted to talk more about that, and then we got distracted with
all of the terrible things,
things, and the tiger benches and all that. So going back to transnational repression, how is the Chinese Communist Party monitoring people? Let's just focus on the U.S. for now. Like, how are they monitoring Chinese dissidents and like other China-connected danger people as part of this transnational repression?
Well, I mean, they have an enormous amount of human intelligence, unfortunately. A large population of the students that are over here, a large population that came over from China, they're working here. If they're not outright spies when they came here, they have family members back home, and those are often used as leverage so that you could actually be a regular student, or you're just trying to get a degree and make a good life for yourself. But you happen to be Chinese, and the Chinese government comes and knocks on your door while you're sitting in Iowa at your university and say, look, you need to look after, I want you to look at spy on your other Chinese students or something that's going on campus. Maybe there's a Falun Gong group on campus. So a lot of that human intelligence happens a lot through the Chinese community. And it's primarily through the embassy control over the student groups that are on campus, or the embassy coordinating community groups, pro-Beijing community groups in Chinatown. And that's highly pervasive, and that's a big way in which they kind of keep tabs on people and do a lot of surveillance here.
I remember because the FBI has started talking about transnational repression this year, and they had released some indictments of people who were basically accused of helping the Chinese Communist Party harass Chinese dissidents in the U.S. And one of them was a guy who actually was posing as also a Chinese dissident, where he had for decades been in the community of like activists, democracy activists, different groups, and kind of got people to confide in him, from Hong Kong or different places, and he was like passing along information to the Chinese Communist Party the whole time.
Wow, that's terrifying.
And we get, that happens. I mean, that's one of the things with Falun Gong is it's totally open. It's like if you want to go to an event or a practice site in the park, I mean, it's just, it's totally free for anybody who comes and wants to learn or participate. So it's a fairly porous system, and we see a lot of that. I mean, usually it's
so you as a Falun Gong practitioner don't know whether other Falun Gong practitioners are like actually plants from the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, now that you put it that way, I mean, we know each other pretty well. And I think after you've practiced Falun Gong, there are certain things, if I see someone sitting over there chugging a beer and smoking a cigarette, I'm like, okay, that's probably not someone who practices Falun Gong. So there are indicators. But yeah, I mean, there'll be a lot of, if new people come in, we're not sure. But the interesting thing is we found is we don't pay too much attention to it because there's not a lot they can find out that we don't. We're not
when
hiding much.
When are you going to have the next parade?
Yeah, when are we going to have the next parade? Or, when are we going to go sit in front of the Chinese consulate again? We're not worried about that. And quite frankly, a lot of those people, came over and they're here to spy on us. And they'll be like, at some point, they're like, I don't want to do this anymore. Can I have a Falun Gong book and start reading it? And they do. So we don't spend a lot of time on that. It definitely happens. They definitely have people come in and they're spying on us and trying to learn something, but it's just not something we're too worried about.
What does concern you with the transnational repression?
A few things. one, the violence, which continues. I mean, we talked about some of the stuff that happened to some of our folks, and that continues. I mean, whether it's in the United States or Hong Kong, certainly. I mean, we've had people beaten up with baseball bats and all kinds of stuff. We had someone who was shot, a guy who lived in Australia that was following this Chinese delegation. He was going to serve them with legal papers for crimes against humanity, things like that. Couple guys pulled up next to him with semi-automatic rifles and shot him.
Where was this?
This was actually, he was following this delegation. They had just landed in South Africa. So the shooting actually happened in South Africa, but this gentleman is from Australia. So a lot of beatings and death threats and stuff. So that we're certainly worried about. These days, we're also worried about the diplomatic pressure. And we talked about, John Zeman walking up and talking to Bill Clinton. There were people going into Condoleezza's office when she was National Security Advisor and sort of trying to spew a bunch of anti-Falun Gong stuff. And it happens pretty much at every level of the government and has for the last 20 years. I mean, we have mayors in small cities in America who will call us and say, I was just about to do a proclamation for you, and I got a letter from the consulate in Los Angeles telling me that they're going to pull out and not be our sister city if I support you. That stuff is rampant. And they go to our congresspeople, our mayors, our governors. I mean, they're constantly working on our government leaders to try and suppress us and silence here. So that's the second thing we're worried about. The third thing, which is the sort of hardest for us to do anything about, but is the economic coercion. And, you see that the NBA was a clear example of that. I mean, what happened when, Dallas, not the Mavericks,
Dale Morey,
Houston Rockets, right? The general manager.
He retweeted something to support
Hong Kong.
Falun Gong is what I was going to say. Falun Gong.
Yeah, you support
different than the Falun Gong.
So support democracy, right? As edgy as that is.
It's a disgusting thing for an American to do, but go on.
Like free Hong Kong, right?
And so, the entire league went silent.
Right. But they had like their whole broadcast in China basically shut down.
Sure. But to wield that kind of power over the NBA on Hong Kong, which Hong Kong's very visible, it's democracy oriented, it's something the Americans understand. Now, imagine the amount of economic coercion they're able to do with Falun Gong. Who is not as well known in American society as Hong Kong democracy or something like that. And so that is something we worry about, is that the economic coercion and the extent to which, early on the persecution, there were IT companies in America who are at trade shows in China saying, hey, you want to catch Falun Gong? Use our technology, use our routers, use our switches. We'll help you build this firewall and this surveillance mechanism. And that was sort of the early days when they weren't really guarded about it. I'm sure it's 10, 20 times worse now.
Well, they don't have to, because now Huawei has stolen Cisco's technology, so they can do the routers and all that themselves. It's all homegrown.
The ones that work anyway, yeah.
Have you seen cases of economic coercion related to Falun Gong?
It's hard. That's the hardest area to say, there's a smoking gun. You see weird behavior. You see, the media is maybe the most obvious, where they'll cover the Uyghurs. They'll cover, to some extent, Hong Kong, although there's some questionable stuff there. Total silence on Falun Gong. And yet, if you look at the raw data, the human rights reports, what is Freedom House saying every year? What's Amnesty saying every year? It's there. Right. So why the silence in some of the media? And so you have to, and then you look at the leadership of those media companies and you go, oh my goodness, they've got enormous deals in China. It would be completely bizarre if something weird wasn't going on there.